Da, 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 da. Dun, da-dun, da-dun, da-da-dun. Zoom. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our review of episode 6 of season 2 of Star Trek
Sure.
Strange New Worlds. 6. Yeah, 6 is good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm joined as always by my very best friend in the whole wide world, Jason Harding. Hi, Jason.
Hi, everybody.
This episode was titled Lost in Translation,
Mm-hmm.
which is also the name of the movie that should have won Best Picture the year Return of the King did.
My God.
But let's not start out with a fight.
Uh-huh.
Let's talk about what happened in the episode. This was an
Let's
Uhura
recap.
episode.
Yeah, it was an Uhura episode, but it was also like a Counselor Troy episode.
It feels like the plot of this would have been a Troy episode if it was TNG.
Wasn't there a couple of
how
TNG?
things went?
Yeah, TNG. There was specifically one TNG episode.
That had a
moon
very
circling.
similar.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. It was the one with the two-dimensional people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or not. I guess they weren't people, but the two-dimensional
The two-dimensional beings. Yeah.
And it's a very similar conceit to this one. But
Yep.
before we get to that reveal, the Enterprise has come to this nebula where Starfleet is building a big deuterium refinery thing that they refer to a couple of times
run
as
on deuterium,
not
dilithium. That's later.
Right.
So.
And so the deuterium refinery isn't working. They can't get it to work. Mm-hmm. So the Enterprise is there, and also the Farragut is there, and they're
they've temporarily made Pike fleet captain.
Fleet captain, because he's in charge of the Enterprise and the Farragut and the crew of the refinery. So fleet captain.
Uhura starts hearing transformer sounds all over the place.
We both said Megatron, and then we both instantly corrected. No, actually, it's more like Soundwave. But
it's Soundwave.
It's Transformers.
She's hearing
sound
stuff. She's been told you're working too hard, or you're tired, or whatever. You're perfectly fine. Go to sleep or do something.
Yeah, get some rest.
She hasn't really been sleeping well. She's been watching these old videos with her and Hemmer.
Yeah.
He made some training videos for her, and guess who's on the Farragut? We already know who's on the Farragut.
It's up and coming hotshot young officer James T. Kirk, who has just been promoted to first officer of the Farragut.
Him and his brother meet, and they try to have a drink together, but that doesn't really work because they're both competing for their father's affection, and Kirk's like, I didn't do anything. And George is like, I want my daddy to love me. And he's like, nope. So they don't
he won't.
They don't really get along. And then there's a dude that's sabotaging the refilling station, and he's going kind of bonkers. And he's kind of going the same kind of bonkers that Uhura is going bonkers, because she keeps hearing things and seeing things. She's hallucinating stuff.
Yeah, she sees a zombie version of Hemmer.
Yeah.
She hallucinates a fight with someone who, like her doppelganger, looks just like her.
She's a whole hallway full of dead people.
Yeah.
And she's getting worse and worse. And the only person that seems to want to help her is who?
Is Kirk.
James T. Kirk, that's right.
Yep.
And
she's like, I'll be your sidekick for this episode.
Yeah. So they catch the guy they catch a guy who's going crazy like her, that's sabotaging the station. And while they're talking to him, he goes bonkers and he runs around the ship, and he climbs up into one of the nacelles, and he's trying to do something. Uhura tries to stop him. He goes completely crazy. Kirk comes in, beams them out, and then the nacelle explodes, and the guy dies.
Yeah, he gets spaced. Yeah.
Uhura's pretty upset about that. Kirk tries to comfort her. He gives a very Kirk speech.
Oh yeah, about fighting back against death, and
fighting back against death. It's very Kirk.
Very much.
And also, she doesn't want cookies. And then she's watching one of the videos that Hemmer made her, and she's like, "Oh, geez, that's it."
She
And
has an epiphany.
she has an epiphany. What if they're alien creatures that are trying to talk to me through my brain parts, just like they tried to talk to the other crazy guy that died? And it's overloading our system. And they're like, "Well, what are they trying to say?" And they're saying, "Well, I think they're saying that we're killing them, and please stop killing them." And
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh my God, we're taking in the deuterium and processing it, and we're like killing an alien thing, right?" Because now they've gone to George Kirk, right? They've gone to
Yeah.
George.
Because he's like he's in the science department, and he's like,
Yeah.
I know what this might be. They might be beings from another dimension that live or that are connected to the deuterium molecules, and
Yep.
if we refine them, then it tortures them, and they would like us to stop that, please.
So then they run and they convince Pike to blow up the entire station, and that's what they do. They blow up the entire station, and she's like, "Everything's fine." And that's what Uhura says. Everything's fine. Also, there's a side plot that Una and what's her face?
Pelia.
Pelia,
Carol
they don't
Kane,
really
yeah.
get along very well. And then when they're escaping, then they're fighting and all this others. They don't one doesn't seem to take the other seriously. And then when they're flying out on the shuttle, um, she admits that she basically Pelia tells Una, "Oh, you're not actually upset because I gave you a C when you took my class at Starfleet Academy. You're upset because I replaced Hemmer."
Yes.
And that's kind of it. So they make up because they've been bickering the entire episode. And the end.
Yeah, well, and there's a
Well,
little
okay,
there's
the
the
end,
Kirk
the
and
coda at the
Uhura.
end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kirk. We get the meeting, the first meeting between Spock and Kirk, because
Yep.
Kirk is having a drink with Uhura in the Enterprise's bar.
Yep.
And Spock, I mean, everybody's gonna go nuts over it's the first meeting between Kirk and Spock. But my favorite part of that scene is that little detail, the way they bring Spock into it. He's complaining once again about George refusing to clean up after himself. And he picks up George's glass that George left on the table and just smoothly puts it on the tray of a passing waiter. Yeah, it's beautiful. So well done.
And we pan out of them talking in the bar, and then the end. So
that's
Steve, how did you feel about this episode?
I mostly really liked it. There were little bits of it that didn't quite work, but not to the extent that they made me not like the episode. I mean, it's mostly an Uhura episode with Kirk along for the ride, and it's a really nice Uhura episode. I feel like she carries it well, and we mentioned that if this was a TNG episode, this would have probably been a Counselor Troy plot.
Yeah.
It makes sense for this to be an Uhura plot because she's the communications officer, and they kind of come out and say that at a certain point where Uhura is like, "Oh, I'm the communications officer who can't communicate what's wrong with her," and it's like she's the one who figures it out. The aliens are tapping into her brain and trying to tell her something, and she's the one who figures it out. So I think she does really well as sort of the lead character this week, and I agree with you. The Kirk stuff is really good. Paul Wesley's Kirk, I like him more every time I see him. I really liked him in the time travel episode from earlier this season with La'an. I liked him here as well. And what I noticed about him this time was, and you mentioned that speech he gives, that, and just in a broader sense, he's starting to sound like Kirk. Like in terms of his dialogue, like he does, like Paul Wesley is obviously playing him his own way.
He's not trying to do a Shatner impression.
He's not doing a Shatner impression, thank God. He's playing him his own way, just like Ethan Peck plays Spock his own way instead of just trying to do a Nimoy impression. And that works fantastically well too. But in terms of, it feels like the writers are finally starting to kind of dial into the Kirk voice in terms of the way they write him.
What's important to him and how he feels about certain things.
Yeah, and this episode, he really, for the first time, and this is what, the third time we've seen him? I
This
could
is
hear.
technically, I think this is the first time we've actually
We've seen
seen
the
him,
actual, the
right?
quote unquote actual
It
Kirk, as
wasn't some
opposed to
time
like an
travel
alternate. Yeah,
bullshit, which
yeah,
is both the Pike one from last year and
and
the
then the time travel
La'an one from this year,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
This is like real Kirk.
This is the
Mm-hmm.
actual the Kirk that is going to go on and become
Mm-hmm.
the captain of the Enterprise at
Right.
some point. Um,
And this is the
and
meeting
yeah,
that Kirk says in the original series, the one time that
yes,
he met
yes,
Pike. Yeah.
because there is one line of dialogue
Mm-hmm.
from the menagerie that
Yeah.
hardcore Trekkies, ever since it was announced that Kirk was going to be a recurring character in this show, hardcore Trekkies, of course, because Trekkies always panic and lose their minds and like, but
Mm-hmm.
in the menagerie, Kirk said he only met Pike once, and it's like, all right, calm down. That was this episode,
Yeah,
because
that's this episode. This is the
it's
one time that
clearly,
Kirk
yeah,
meets him. Yeah.
it's clearly been contrived
Mm-hmm.
specifically to be that time, because Pike has been he's been temporarily promoted to fleet captain, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that Kirk says in the menagerie. I met him once after he'd been promoted to fleet captain. Okay, boom, there we go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's this. So, calm down.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I thought Kirk was really good in this, and
Yeah.
they give him they have a really nice scene with him and La'an,
Mm-hmm.
that shows that sort of because like they recognize each other, because La'an calls him at the end of that episode, so he remembers
Mm-hmm.
her from that weird Skype call where she's like,
Yeah.
I need some information about your brother for the security file, so he remembers her because of that, and of course she remembers him because they had this whole adventure together that
Mm-hmm.
for him never happened. um, and it's a nice scene, and it doesn't go on too long, but
Mm-hmm.
it's the two of them just having a little chat, because they happen to run into each other in the corridor when they're chasing Ramon, the guy who's like the sabotage guy.
Mm-hmm.
And they have this little exchange that you can tell is kind of painful for her, but that she doesn't show it, because
Mm-hmm.
he wouldn't know what was going on anyway. And it's really nice. And then we get, of course, what we are supposed to regard as the historic first meeting between Kirk and Spock
Kirk
at
and
the end.
Spock, yeah.
And yeah, so all of that stuff I thought was fine. I liked the attempt of doing a subplot with number one and Pelia.
Mm-hmm.
I thought their scenes together worked fine. I thought the characters worked well together, and those scenes were, entertaining and
Mm-hmm.
amusing, and the way they kind of bicker with each other. I don't really buy the, well, you're only mad at me because I remind you of your dead friend. I mean, not that doesn't make sense. Like, not that a person in that situation wouldn't feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
It just, in this situation, it feels kind of like that's sort of out of left field. Is like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
understand, because like we've gotten some Hemmer stuff with Uhura in this episode,
Mm-hmm.
but now it's like, nobody's mentioned. I guess, well, Pelia, Uhura mentioned Hemmer to Pelia in their scene earlier
Mm-hmm.
on, but now Pelia is like, oh, I bet number one must be upset that Hemmer's dead too. And it's like, okay, I guess, but like, it doesn't quite
I
land for
didn't
me.
have a
It feels
problem.
like,
I didn't have a problem with that.
it just feels a little like, oh, okay,
I
it
liked it
doesn't,
because it
quite.
kind of it flushes out Una, that she's not cold,
Well,
right?
and I like the general idea of not forgetting Hemmer, of
Mm-hmm.
reminding us that he was there and that he had an impact on the other people. It's a very Deep Space Nine
Mm-hmm.
thing. It's like, oh, hey, these people are really living these lives, and they remember
Mm-hmm.
things. And when
Yeah.
one of their friends dies, even if it was 10 episodes ago and we don't mention it very often,
The big difference
it's still
between
real for them. And
between TNG and other things is that people died constantly in TNG, and it didn't seem to have any impact on the characters, except for
yeah,
one death, except for for Tasha Yar.
which did come up every once in a while. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yeah,
but I mean,
but yeah,
we didn't have episodes after Tasha Yard died where, Picard was having some sort of breakdown because he's remembering how she died under his command,
right,
or
right.
Riker, or anyone else I would say Data, but Data can't have that kind of breakdown.
Right.
But it was the same on TOS.
Oh
Someone
yeah,
died, and
people. Yeah.
none of the main characters died, but I mean, people would die, and it didn't have any lasting repercussions. At least in this show, when someone dies, it does have some lasting repercussions.
Yeah, it's just, and that's all you need is just the occasional reminder of like, oh,
Yeah.
all of these episodes are all connected, even if they're separate
Mm,
stories. And every week it's beginning, middle, and end, and then you start over next week. These
yeah.
things are all happening in the lives of these characters, and just
Hmm.
because something happened last week, it doesn't mean it doesn't still matter to them this week. And so I like that part of it. And I like that we were both kind of saying, oh, I guess Bruce Horak came back and got into full makeup and costume as Hemmer for, maybe 2 minutes total
To
of screen time,
film some
um,
YouTube videos,
to
and
film some YouTube videos and like a couple of seconds worth of footage for the bridge at the end.
and don't forget he had special makeup for the zombie makeup
He
when
was
he
a
was
zombie, yes,
appearing as a
yes.
zombie to Uhura.
And
Yeah.
good for him, good for him.
We also
Um,
added in some things
yeah.
in there that we had to add in the fact that Spock and what's her nuts,
Oh,
Chapel.
Chapel. They have an erotic chess
And
game.
boy, no, they don't. It's not erotic. She looks fucking upset. I'm like, oh boy, you seem so happy that you guys are together and doing stuff. And they're like, we're not in a relationship, but we are in a relationship. It's kind of, they use the Schrodinger's
The
cat,
Schrodinger's cat analogy, yeah.
Schrodinger's, yeah. And if it's, I'm fine with them reminding us, hey, they got together or something, but I again, I already know where this is going. If they're following, and they are trying to follow canon as best they
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
This goes nowhere. Hopefully it goes
Yeah.
somewhere interesting before it goes nowhere, right?
Right. Well, you got
I
to
mean,
figure, I mean, they have
isn't she supposed to be engaged to Colby or Corby? It's
Corby,
Corbin.
yeah.
I can't
Roger
remember.
Corby. Roger
Roger
Corby.
Corby, the
Yeah.
android man.
The android
Um,
man. Yeah.
she's supposed to be at some point engaged to him,
Yeah.
right?
At some point.
Enough that she gets
There's
upset.
plenty of time for that.
Yeah, exactly. You
That
said you had a couple of problems with it.
there was the thing I mentioned already
Mhm.
about, not quite buying the reason for the Hemmer related reason for Una and Pelia
Mhm.
bickering.
Mhm.
And I thought it was when Uhura has the epiphany, which I'm fine with
Yes.
because that's a trope that happens not
Mhm.
just in Star Trek, that happens in almost every action adventure or suspense series where the hero suddenly is doing something totally unrelated and then suddenly they realize what's going on.
Mhm.
Like that's like a classic thing. I don't have a problem with that. Um, but like after she has that realization and figures out, she thinks what's going on,
Mhm.
the scene where she's talking with Kirk and Kirk, um, and like she goes back and sort of remembers the various hallucinations that she's had
Mhm.
and kind of interprets them, and that feels like she figures all that out really fast. It's like she remembers, she's like, oh, let me see, in the hallway I felt closed in, and then I
Mhm.
hallucinated people being blown out on the bridge, which means I wanted to escape, and then and it's
Mhm.
like she comes up with all these really sort of immediate, very clear interpretations of the meanings of all her various hallucinations. And she's like,
Mhm.
aha, I've got it. Now I know. And I mean, I get it. Like, you want to move the story along. Like, Uhura needs to figure this out so that the next thing can happen. But it feels a little glib where she's just kind of standing there,
Um,
you
I would
know.
say yes, but no one else is trying to interpret. She's not really talking to anybody about what she's experiencing. Not really.
Yeah.
She's saying, I'm seeing things, and then everyone tells her, go to bed. And she's like, okay, fine, I'll go to
You have
bed.
deuterium poisoning.
Yeah. So for her to make these, because she's the only one that can feel what she's feeling, and what she connects is the visions to what she's feeling. And then being a communications officer, interpreting what's trying to be communicated to her. Right.
Yeah.
So that's what she's doing. She's translating in that
Yeah.
scene, which is what she wasn't doing before. There was a bunch of memories, a couple of which she didn't want to,
Yeah.
one of
Like
which is
painful
not
memories.
even a
Yeah.
memory. It's a fabrication based on what she knows about the accident that killed her parents.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because she sees like the crashed
Because
shuttle and everything.
she
Yeah.
wasn't there.
Right.
Right. And so it's an interpretation, and that's the one that she has to force herself through in order to be able to communicate with these freaking aliens. I like the episode. The only problem
Yeah.
I think that I had was, boy, oh boy, does Pike really trust her instincts.
I didn't have a problem with Pike doing that. I mean,
I don't either, really.
it feels like a Pike thing to do. Like Pike feels like the
Mhm.
cap, because as we've talked about in previous episode reviews, like he's the captain who genuinely cares about his crew
Yeah.
as human beings, and he seems, it completely feels true to character to me. If Uhura or any one of the crew that he's close to would come up to him and say, "You have to trust me on this. This is what we have to do. You
Mhm.
know, I can explain it to you the best I can, but you just have to believe me."
I would love for
That
them to
Pike would be
write
that guy.
I would love for them to write an episode, because this is similar to other episodes of Trek that we've already seen,
Yeah.
right? Remember when Riker was going bonkers and he kept dreaming that he was being abducted? Turns out he was abducted.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was like, and I would love for them to write an episode where one of the people are going crazy and they want the captain to do something, and the captain goes ahead and does it, and it turns out that they were just going crazy.
That would be a great twist. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be a great twist.
It turns out that everything was in their head. You know, I love the fact that he is that trusting of the members of his crew. I really do. It's a very what turns out to be a very Pike thing to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But personally, I would have had him be a little bit more hesitant. There's something about having a Starfleet captain where someone runs up and goes, "No, there's aliens in them clouds. What's your proof?" "I feel it in my brain.
It's in my brain."
It's like, oh, okay, let's calm down. "No, you're killing them all." It's like, okay, what's your evidence? And if they have evidence, right?
Right.
Great. They show it to him. Here, this is what we found. It's it's affecting the communication center of the brain. It's what caused Ramos to go bonkers. It's what's causing her to go bonkers. And they're trying to communicate. And here's our evidence. And then Pike goes, "All right, let's do it."
Yeah.
But instead, she comes in and goes, "My brain," and he goes, "All right,
You are whatever you
cool.
say.
We'll just do whatever you say." And I do like the fact that they do address it at the end of the episode, when he says, "Don't worry, this is going to be on me."
Right.
Okay. Maybe on Kirk.
It's my decision. Yeah, he does kind of tease like, maybe I'll say it was Kirk's idea a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, I liked the episode.
Yeah, I liked it too. I do wish, I mean, it's, again, this is a tiny little gripe that does not affect my enjoyment of the episode at all.
You
but
can never be happy, Steve. I swear to
No,
God.
I like the episode. I like the episode a lot, but I wish they had used a little bit of restraint when Kirk and Spock shook hands and they had not cut to the close up of the handshake like it's like the most significant handshake ever. I think it would have worked just fine if they would have kept the two shot that they had, and Uhura says, "Oh, Spock, this is James Kirk. Kirk, this is Spock," and just have them shake hands.
Steve, you know how much worse it could have been.
Because it's no big deal to them. Like they don't realize, they don't know how important it is. It's only important to us, not to them. It's just Spock meeting a guy from another ship.
The characters didn't see the close up of the handshake. That close up was for us.
Right. But I'm saying viewers. We know how significant it is, so we don't need it. It's overkill to me. Now, again, it doesn't ruin the show. It's a great episode, but it's like we don't need the close. It's like,
you know what?
It's like in an action.
It's a musical swell. The close up of the handshake. Yeah, the close up of their eyes meeting.
That would have been too much. And I'll tell you something else I noticed that actually that made it a little more palatable to me is that after we get the handshake, and then they cut to another shot, and then they cut back to the same angle of the handshake for a second shot of Uhura sort of like in the background as she invites them to sit down. So I'm like, okay, so they used, they went back to the angle. It's not just like a special angle that they used just for the super important handshake. They came back to it to kind of make it a little smoother. So, I feel like maybe someone on the, someone in the production was aware of it too. And so look, we can't just have a special shot just for the handshake. Let's find a way to come back to this so it feels like more part of a cohesively constructed scene instead of just we're banging it on the handshake because it's Kirk and Spock, you know. Yeah.
Also, I like the bar. I mentioned this before.
Yes.
10
Yes.
forward is a piece of is the most bland garbage. Fucking, I mean, if you compare the two, right? You compare 10 forward to the bar lounge. I think people get lunch there too because we saw
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
episode they were getting lunch there. It feels like a bar, right? It feels like a place where someone would want to go and relax. Whereas 10
Yeah.
forward felt like, oh, it's like our quarters but with less furniture.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that I notice about it compared with 10 Forward, and I mean, in terms of the lighting and the atmosphere and the music and just the way the characters sort of move around, like it feels more like a bar than 10 Forward did. But also, like when you compare 10 Forward to this space, 10 Forward just seems so two-dimensional because it's like there's the bar is against one wall and the big windows are against the other wall, and then it's just chairs and tables in the middle, and it's like, oh, okay, like it's a pretty simple, like, and you know, if you go to like a restaurant or a bar, unless it's like a real hole in the wall, like usually it's set up more like what we see in Strange New Worlds, where it's like there's the area kind of in the middle where the drinks are and where people can go and sit at the bar, and then on the outer edges of it is the tables, and you know, and you notice the aquarium that is like kind of all around it.
And I don't know if that's real because
probably not.
In Pike's quarters, he's constantly changing
his windows. Can be different scenes and stuff. Yeah.
But related to 10 Forward, let's bring up Pelia. Okay.
Yes.
I had mentioned, I think, in a previous one that Pelia is kind of like their Guinan. You know, Guinan is this. We don't know how long Guinan species lives. But she's just kind of around, but I think one of the things that I like about Pelia a little bit more than Guinan is that Pelia's flawed. That Pelia is old. She's
cranky.
Seen a lot of stuff. She kind of doesn't have patience for people who, you know, judge her or misinterpret her or you know, whatever. And I like that she doesn't just get along immediately with everyone that meets her, right?
Yeah.
Without her changing her character.
Yes.
Too much. And that's what I kind of like. Guinan was like, I'm here for everybody. I'm a better counselor than the ship's counselor. Right? Oh yeah, and I also know I also know how to use a phaser. Oh yeah, and she never mentions how old she is or any of this stuff. Everything's kind of like and I think that was probably because the writers went, "Oh boy, we have Whoopi Goldberg. Let's make this character." Well, what is she? What's she about? We'll figure that out later. We'll just get her in there.
She's whatever she needs to be.
Well, is she an officer or something? No, we'll make her a bartender and we'll build a set for her so that she'll have her own set. Okay. Why can't she just be a Starfleet officer? Shut up. We're just coming up with stuff. And I was kind of like, why couldn't she just have been a Starfleet officer?
I don't mind that I think I'm happy that Guinan is the way Guinan is, but she is definitely a much different presence than Pelia, because Guinan is always very calm and very soothing and very wise. And Pelia actually has a moment in this episode that to me is maybe the second funniest beat in the episode after the one I mentioned earlier where Spock comes in and takes George's glass. It's I think the first time we cut back to the refinery, the deuterium space station, after we've established it the first time, and like number one has told Pelia to go off and, you know, get things running again.
Yeah.
And then we cut back to whatever Uhura is doing, and then we cut over to the space station again. And Pelia has, you know, disobeyed orders, but discovered something important, right? But she walks up to Una and she's filthy. She has like dirt on her face. She has dirt on her
jacket. Yeah.
And it's like, and it's not, and number one does eventually mention like that, you have crumbs on your jacket, but in that scene, it is completely unmentioned. Like Pelia just walks up and she's a mess. And there's just something about that she just walks up to the second in command of the ship and she's a fucking wreck. And she's like, "Hey, I have something important. I found something important." And it's not overdone. Like she's not like she doesn't look like she just crawled out of a trash can, but she looks obviously dirty and disheveled compared to how she looked before. And the way Carol Kane plays that and just that visual is just I love that. I love that so much.
Oh, and casual drop, space hippie.
Space hippie, yes, yes.
She calls her a space hippie.
And her reaction to that is great.
And so I've been called a lot of things.
Yeah.
But I mean, here's the thing. Pelia feels fully formed and they're revealing stuff gradually. Yeah. Whereas I think Guinan wasn't fully formed. They created this character, oh, she's the bartender. And maybe and she's mysterious, her past is mysterious. She has some connection to Picard. And that was going to be the end. And I was like, okay, but she never developed past the point of being the person that never gets upset and has all the answers. Right.
That's fair. That's completely fair.
She never really, she didn't have really any kind of, well, who did?
I was going to say that's the kind of show TNG was. TNG was the show where you establish the characters very clearly. You know who everybody is, but they don't really change all that much as the show goes on.
Oh, by the way, just to bring up a plot point that was kind of just left dangling from last season. Oh boy, I hope we don't see anything about Spock's brother.
They did kind of, yeah. I mean, I assume we're going to see him again at some point because they went out of their way to show Sybok at the end.
No, well, they didn't really show Sybok.
Well, they showed that he was there. You didn't see like his face or anything, but it was like, there's Sybok.
But I mean, is that just going to be left dangling, or was that just an Easter egg to make people go, "Ooh, it's Sybok"? You know what the funny thing about it is it's a reference to the least popular Star Trek movie.
Yeah.
But they're still treating it like canon.
Well, why wouldn't they treat it like canon? I mean, it's
all of Spock's secret brothers and sisters that we didn't know anything about.
I mean, you know how I feel about canon.
I know you don't give a shit.
But I also feel like part of not giving a shit is I'm not embarrassed by any of it. Like if I were a writer in a Star Trek show and I had an idea for what I thought would be a story worth telling, and it made reference to some, event from a movie or a TV episode that everybody thought was terrible, like, well, I have an idea for it, so I'm going to do it.
Steve, you even said both of us have admitted onto the internet that there's a part of us that both very much loves Star Trek V.
Oh yeah, I said just recently in one of my patron hangouts there are times, it hasn't happened for a while, but there have been many times when I feel like watching a Star Trek movie and Star Trek V is the one I pop in because it's just it's not a good movie, but it's a very watchable movie. And there are moments in it that I really genuinely enjoy, even though the rest of the movie is kind of shitty. Like there are bits of it that I think work very well.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Me too. I like it too. I just hope he doesn't show up again. I hope that's it. I hope I hope we don't get a whole storyline about Sybok.
I hope if he does, it's at least a good story. And I have confidence in this show that if these writers are planning a Sybok episode, that it'll be a worthwhile episode.
There's also a part of me that kind of wishes the Gorn would go away.
I don't have a problem. I mean, they were mentioned once in this episode. They're sort of like a specter, kind of off on the fringe. They don't actually appear all that often, but they are a threat that exists and that is mentioned. And I don't have a problem with them being used like that. I wouldn't want them to start being used like Voyager ended up using the Borg, where it's like every other week it's a Gorn episode. I don't think that would be a good idea. But
with the whole thing of the revelation of how they procreate, they feel like goopy monsters more than they do, creatures that can talk into a microphone and tell Kirk, "I'll kill you quick. It'll be fine. I'll kill you really fast." I know that's not what he sounds like, but I mean,
what I think would be great is, at some point in the run of this series, after they've, they've shown us that they're updating and reinterpreting all of the classic Star Trek stuff. So it now it looks this way, and it's all been redesigned for a modern aesthetic, and
No.
you know. And which I love. I think it all looks gorgeous. And they've done like their version of the Gorn that are more like xenomorphs from Alien, and they're more sort of animalistic and threatening. And after they've done all of that, just do one episode where like we meet an adult Gorn and he looks literally exactly the same as he looked in Arena. Like it's just a dude in
I'll
a rubber
do you
suit.
one better. If we get another Star Trek series that's hopefully set in the future of what we're currently doing, not like Gearson, I want there to be a Gorn crewmate.
Yeah.
That's
and
what
have him wear the same kind of costume with a mouth that doesn't move,
but like
and
a Star
obviously
Trek,
like a helmet. And he
I don't
talks
want,
like this.
I don't want it to be that ridiculous, Steve. I want him to be like a character.
And he moves, like Frankenstein, and
he moves very slowly like this.
Yeah.
And you can make jokes about it. It says, well, it takes Mobac a little bit more time to get to the engineering room.
So good episode. We both like the episode. And
hooray.
You know what?
For a strong season so far. So
very strong season, yes. You know what next week is?
Yeah, I know. Look, I've openly admitted on this show and to you in person that I kind of just gave up on Lower Decks because I just didn't think it was funny. But I trust the writers. We're on the
same page there.
The writers of this show that what are they? It's Boimler, and it looks like only two people carry over.
It's Boimler and Mariner. It's Boimler and Mariner. Yeah.
I'm sure, and I'm fairly confident that they will write a good script. It's probably going to be a comedy episode.
Yeah,
and other people, I've heard some people saying, "Oh, I'm going to be upset because it's going to make Lower Decks," because there are lots of people who don't like Lower Decks. It's going to make Lower Decks canon. I don't care.
Who gives a shit? It's canon already. Who gives a shit?
Is it?
Like, I am not a huge fan of the show. I don't give a fuck whether it's canon or not. Whether they could come out and say, "Oh, guess what? It's definitely not canon." It wouldn't make me like it anymore. What is the argument for it not being considered canon? I just don't understand that, like that mindset. Like what? Because it's silly. What show have you been watching for the last 55 years? It's been silly all along.
Cartoon, Steve. And my argument for it's a cartoon is we've already brought in stuff from the animated series from the 1970s that is now canon.
Hopefully next week's episode will be a good episode and we can talk about some of this then. But there was a really great, and after this, I swear to God, that's the end. But Akiva Goldsman, the co-showrunner of Strange New Worlds, gave an interview a couple weeks ago, and they asked him about this upcoming crossover episode with Lower Decks. Yeah. And they said, is there going to be any explanation for how Mariner and Boimler go from animated to live action? And Akiva Goldsman said, no.
Yeah.
Like he said, and he said, the characters on Lower Decks don't know they're animated. Like that's the presentation of the show.
Yeah.
Like it's the same universe. When Riker shows up on Lower Decks, it's the same Riker that was on TNG.
Except he's a little goofier.
Yeah, but like they're the same people. It doesn't make a difference to them whether they're a cartoon or they're live action. You fucking nerds. You fucking sad, pathetic, literalist fucking nerds. Anyway.
This is my least favorite aspect about you. You know that, right?
I want to set them all on fire.
I know, but you're one of them, Steve.
But not like that. I'm not in the same way that they are.
I don't know how to break this to you, Steve, but that is uttered by every fucking nerd.
No,
I'm not like that.
I'm not that kind of nerd. I'm an acceptable kind.
That's right, honey. No, you're not that kind of nerd. You know how I know that every nerd has said that is because I come from the dark ages of nerdity.
Before the nerds ran the world, when we skulked in the shadows
in the 1970s and the 1980s. Where if you liked something like Star Trek or comic books or even like Star Wars a little bit too much, you didn't bring it up.
You
We
had to
did
like
talk
you
about
would
it.
you would like if you thought someone else you were talking to might also be into it, you would like bring it up very cautiously
Yeah.
and kind of
You didn't
feel it out,
you didn't come to school on Monday and go, I had such a great time at the comic book convention. You didn't get to say things like that.
No,
Unless you
unless
had
you
certain friends that were like, oh, they really wanted to go. And it was like,
yeah,
oh, did your
yeah,
Dr. Octopus costume work out great? And stuff like that. And it was
yeah,
like
that kind of thing. Sure.
that kind of thing. So
All right. We'll be back next week for a review of the much anticipated Strange New Worlds Lower Decks crossover episode.
And hopefully Steve won't be gatekeeping quite as much.
I'm not I'm not trying to gatekeep.
I know you're not gatekeeping. It's a joke.
They can like Star Trek in any dumb way they want.
I love everybody who loves you know what? I don't have a problem. If you love Trek, love it in your own goddamn way. That's what I say.
I'm fine. That's what I say too. Any dumb way you want to love it.
Don't you lie to these nice people. You sack of shit. I accept everyone except for those fucking nerds who I'd line up against a wall and shoot.
Only if I had the power to do it. All right. Bye, everybody. With a disruptor. That's right. Not with a phaser.
That's too clean.
With a Veron T disruptor.
Oh dear God.
Ha! See? All right. See you next week, everybody.